You're not a good person. You're terrified. And somewhere deep down, you know it. You've spent your entire life trying to be agreeable, kind, patient, understanding. You don't speak up when something bothers you. You pretend you didn't hear that insult. You smile when you feel like screaming. You say it's fine when it's killing you inside because you've been taught by pain, by fear, by trauma, that confrontation is dangerous, that rocking the boat means drowning. So instead, you've turned yourself into a life raft for everyone else, even if it means slowly sinking. But here's the truth no one ever told you. No one respects a life raft. They use it, they cling to it, and when they don't need it anymore, they leave it behind, forgotten, waterlogged, and sinking. That's what you are when you live in this fake kindness, disposable, and the world can smell it. Carl Jung warned us. If you do not integrate your shadow, if you do not embrace the darker parts of yourself, they will run your life, and you will call it fate. And what is this people-pleasing, this pathological niceness, if not a shadow pretending to be light? You weren't born to serve. You were trained to obey, trained to flinch, trained to swallow the rage that built up every time someone crossed a line and you said nothing. Trained to believe that being good meant being quiet, submissive, invisible. But that wasn't goodness, that was survival. And survival makes sense when you're 5 years old, trying not to get yelled at, trying to keep a parent from leaving, trying to earn the love that should have been unconditional. But now you're a grown adult still stuck in that same prison, wearing a smile as your handcuffs. You think people will like you more if you're nice, that you'll be safer if you stay agreeable, that the world will give you peace if you never demand anything. But the exact opposite happens. The world punishes softness, not compassion, softness, and it can tell the difference. Compassion has boundaries, softness has none. That's why you get ignored. That's why they talk over you. That's why your opinions feel like whispers in a stadium full of shouting. That's why no one texts back. That's why your boss overlooks you. That's why your partner takes you for granted, because you've made yourself invisible, and you thought that was a virtue. If something in this video woke up a part of you that's been silent for too long, share it in the comments. I'd love to hear what hit you the hardest. And if this felt like the beginning of something real, subscribe. We're just getting started. Let me be clear, it's not your fault. You were conditioned to think being passive was the only way to be safe. You learned early that being loud, opinionated, confrontational came with pain. So you defaulted to silence. You avoided eye contact. You apologized for existing. You trained your nervous system to flinch, to fold, to shrink, just to avoid conflict. But here's the cost. You've built a life around avoidance. You've convinced yourself that silence is peace, that people-pleasing is love, that not being noticed is the same as being safe. But what you're really doing is abandoning yourself every single day just to keep others comfortable. Carl Jung taught that freedom begins the moment you stop identifying with the mask. And that's exactly what your kindness has become, a mask. A disguise, a desperate attempt to be accepted in a world that doesn't even see you anymore. You've become so agreeable that no one knows who you really are. You've said yes so many times that no one believes you when you finally say no. You've smiled through so many insults that no one realizes you're bleeding underneath. And worse, you've played the nice role so well that you've forgotten you were ever anything else. But beneath the surface, behind the polite nods and forced grins, there is a storm. There is anger you've never expressed, pain you've never named, power you've never allowed yourself to feel, and that storm is trying to break through. The question is, will you keep holding it back, or will you finally let it rise? Because until you do, you'll keep living like this, ignored, overlooked, unseen, not because the world is cruel, but because you taught it how to treat you. Every time you chose silence over honesty, every time you smiled instead of speaking, every time you apologized for having needs, you told the world, "I'm not important, walk over me, I won't fight back." And the world listened. But that can change, right now. Not by becoming aggressive, not by turning cold, but by removing the mask, by finally admitting that your kindness isn't kindness. It's fear. It's avoidance. It's a shield you no longer need. Not if you want to be free. And freedom doesn't begin with acceptance. It begins with rejection, with confrontation, with the risk of being disliked, disapproved of, even hated, but finally being real. This is the threshold. The moment you stop pretending, the moment you stop performing, the moment you take off the mask and let the world see what's underneath, because that version of you, the one who feels rage, shame, power, and clarity, that's who you really are. And in the next part, we'll talk about what happens when you keep hiding that version of yourself, when your niceness doesn't just make you invisible, it makes you a target. Are you ready to face what you've actually been attracting all this time? People don't take advantage of you because they're evil. They do it because you trained them to. That's the part no one tells you. You think being used, ignored, stepped on is something that just happens to you, but in reality, it's a dynamic you helped create, not intentionally, not maliciously, but through years of silence, through every time you refused to push back, through every moment you tolerated what you should have stopped. This world doesn't reward the silent. It doesn't honor your self-sacrifice. It exploits it. And you've seen this, haven't you? The way others get what they want by speaking their truth, even if it's uncomfortable. The way people who are bold, assertive, even abrasive are feared, respected, heard. And yet you do everything right. You're kind, available, supportive, and still you're forgotten, overlooked, taken for granted. Carl Jung warned us about this danger, that when we repress our true self in favor of the mask, the persona, we don't become more loved, we become more controlled, because the persona isn't who you are. It's who you thought you had to become to survive. And if your survival strategy was niceness, that means your entire identity was built on fear. This is why people cross your boundaries without blinking. You've spent years training them to believe there were no consequences, that they could cancel plans last minute, borrow your energy, waste your time, and you'd still be there, still smiling, still understanding. But let's be honest, you weren't understanding. You were scared. Scared that if you stood up for yourself, you'd lose them. Scared that being assertive would make you mean. Scared that setting a boundary would push people away. So instead, you let them treat you however they wanted. And now you're wondering why no one respects you. It's not because you're weak. It's because you've buried your power so deep beneath politeness that no one can see it anymore, including you. And here's the terrifying part. The more invisible you become, the more dangerous the world feels. Because when people don't sense strength in you, they stop considering you, they interrupt you, they manipulate you, they use you as an emotional dumping ground, and worst of all, they start believing you like it, because you never say otherwise. You've told them through your actions that your needs don't matter, that your time isn't valuable, that your presence is guaranteed no matter how they treat you. And so they test the limits again and again and again, until eventually there are no limits left. That's when the real suffering begins, when the people closest to you, friends, family, partners, begin to act like they own you, not because they're cruel, but because you gave them silent permission. And that's what Carl Jung meant when he said, "What you do not bring to consciousness appears in your life as fate. Your pain becomes your pattern. Your fear becomes your story, and your story becomes your prison. You keep saying things like, 'Why does this always happen to me?' But the truth is brutal. It happens to you because you don't stop it, because you're afraid to be seen as difficult, because you'd rather suffer in silence than speak a truth that might make someone uncomfortable. But what about your comfort? What about your truth? What about the rage that lives under your skin, the one you never show? What about the fatigue you feel from carrying everyone else's weight? What about the loneliness that grows every time you realize no one really knows you because you never let them? You can't keep blaming others for crossing lines you never defended. Did this message speak to your experience? Tell me in the comments. Your story matters here. And if you want more content that actually understands what you're going through, hit subscribe. You're not alone anymore. And here's the sick irony. The more you abandon yourself, the more abandoned you feel. You walk through life hoping someone will rescue you, but how can they if you never even scream? You think you're being noble, selfless, loving, but deep down, you know you're being a coward. Not because you lack strength, but because you're terrified of using it. Because strength means risk. It means rejection. It means people might not like you. They might leave. They might talk behind your back. They might stop calling. They might accuse you of changing. But here's the truth that should shake you to your core. If someone only stays in your life because you never confront them, they were never really with you in the first place. You're holding on to ghosts, to illusions, to people who only love the version of you that bleeds quietly. And it's killing you. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you nod in agreement just to avoid conflict, every time you swallow your truth and smile, you betray yourself a little more. Until one day, there's nothing left. Just a shell, a mask, a memory of who you could have been if you had just told the truth one more time than you stayed silent. But there's still time to reclaim the parts of you that you buried under fake kindness, time to stop shrinking, to stop apologizing for taking up space, to stop letting fear dictate how you live and who you become. Because the truth is, there's power in you, rage in you, clarity in you. But until you let it rise, you will always attract what matches your silence. Manipulators, abusers, users, cowards. And that's what we'll uncover in the next part. What kind of people are drawn to your fake kindness, and why they'll never stop draining you until you face them. Are you ready to see who's been feeding off your silence? Because once you see it, you'll never unsee it. You think the worst part of being too nice is being overlooked. It's not. The worst part is becoming a magnet for people who smell weakness like blood in the water. Because predators don't go after the strong. They don't pick fights with those who might fight back. They look for the ones who flinch, the ones who say, "It's okay," even when it's not. The ones who apologize for things that weren't their fault just to keep the peace. And if you've ever wondered why you always attract narcissists, manipulators, liars, it's not bad luck. It's energetic precision. These people are drawn to light that doesn't know how to burn, to warmth that never sets boundaries, to hearts so desperate to be loved they mistake abuse for connection. Carl Jung explained it perfectly. When you repress the darker parts of yourself, your anger, your power, your resistance, you don't eliminate them. You exile them. And what you exile doesn't disappear. It waits, it festers, it builds in the shadow. And the more you try to be good, the more your unexpressed power attracts those who want to control it. Because they see what you refuse to see. They see your potential, and they know you don't. They see the sharpness under your smile, and they count on you never using it. They see your silence as permission, and your kindness as surrender. These people don't love you. They feed off you. They feed off your guilt, your fear of confrontation, your desperation to be liked. They push your boundaries a little more each time, testing how far they can go before you finally break. And the tragedy is, you rarely do. Because somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that saying no is violence, that taking up space is selfish, that being strong means being cruel. So you play small, stay soft, keep the peace, even when it's killing you. You stay in friendships that feel one-sided because you're scared to be alone. You let your partner speak to you with contempt because at least they're still around. You tolerate family members disrespecting your values because you were taught that love means endurance. But this isn't love, it's a performance. And while you perform, they devour your energy, your time, your self-esteem. They chip away at your identity until one day you wake up and realize you're not even sure who you are anymore. You're just a reflection of what they needed you to be. That's the cost of hiding your shadow. You stop being a person and become a supply of empathy, a supply of tolerance, a supply of emotional labor, and the more you give, the more they expect, until one day you have nothing left to offer but silence. That's when the shame hits. The shame of realizing you were complicit in your own destruction. That every time you avoided a hard conversation, every time you smiled when you wanted to scream, you weren't keeping the peace. You were prolonging your captivity. And the irony? These people respect the exact traits you suppress. They admire assertiveness in themselves. They admire boundaries when they get to break them. They admire confidence, as long as it's not yours. Because if you ever stood up, if you ever said, enough, if you ever let the darkness inside you speak, their illusion would crumble. They'd lose control, and that terrifies them more than anything. That's why they gaslight you. That's why they twist your words. That's why they make you feel guilty for simply having needs. Because deep down, they know what Jung knew. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. And your light is blinding. You've just been taught to dim it. You've been taught that conflict is dangerous, that anger is sin, that speaking up makes you difficult. But none of that is true. What's dangerous is denying your truth until it explodes. What's sinful is abandoning yourself to please those who don't value you. And what makes you difficult to them is what makes you powerful. Because once you reclaim the parts of you that you've been running from, the boldness, the rage, the instinct to protect yourself, the spell breaks. You stop attracting takers. You stop tolerating crumbs. You stop mistaking keeping the peace for being at peace. And that's the moment everything changes. Not because people suddenly start treating you better, but because you stop needing their approval to feel worthy. You stop asking for permission to exist. And that, more than anything, terrifies the ones who once controlled you, because when the nice person stops being nice, the manipulators have nowhere left to hide. But before you can reclaim that power, there's something you need to confront first. Something most people never dare to look at. Your shadow. The part of you that's been watching in silence. Waiting. Burning. Ready to return. And in the next part, we're going there. We're going to face the exact traits you've buried. The parts of you that were never evil, just misunderstood. The ones that once integrated will become the source of your freedom. So ask yourself, are you ready to meet the side of you that could have ended this cycle years ago? Because it's still there, and it's waiting. The shadow is not your enemy. It's the version of you that you exiled the moment you were told it was too much to exist. The anger you weren't allowed to feel. The desire you were told to suppress. The boundaries you were punished for setting. It's everything you were forced to kill in yourself to be accepted by others. And now, it wants to come back. Not to destroy you, but to rebuild you. Because the version of you that you've been living, the one that walks on eggshells, smiles through pain, says it's fine when it's not, isn't real. It's a survival mask, and it's killing you slowly. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In other words, you don't heal by pretending to be perfect. You heal by dragging the wounded, furious, primal parts of you out of the basement of your psyche and giving them a voice. But most people never do that. They're terrified of what they might find. They think, what if I'm not as good as I pretend to be? What if I'm actually angry, jealous, selfish, violent? But the truth is, those parts are already there. They've always been there. The danger isn't in feeling them. The danger is in denying them. Because whatever you repress controls you, silently, from the background. It leaks into your relationships, your reactions, your self-worth. It shapes your decisions in ways you can't even see. You say yes when you want to scream no. You feel resentment but smile anyway. You get walked on and call it compassion. That's not morality. That's moral self-destruction. And here's the most brutal truth. People sense it. Even if they can't explain it, they feel that something in you isn't whole, that you're hiding, that you're pretending, and the world doesn't reward pretense. It exploits it. This is why reclaiming your shadow is not a luxury. It's not a philosophical idea for quiet thinkers. It's a necessity for anyone who wants to survive this world with their dignity intact. Because here's what happens when you begin to embrace that side of you. You stop apologizing for being intense. You realize your anger is sacred, that your fire was never the problem, your suppression of it was. You start noticing who backs away when you stop performing, who gets uncomfortable when you stop shrinking, who suddenly calls you selfish when you finally say no. And most of all, you realize that the fear of conflict was never about others. It was about what you were afraid you might become if you allowed yourself to be fully seen. But you're not a monster. You're just a human being who has learned to amputate pieces of themselves to feel safe. And it's time to stop cutting, because your shadow contains everything you thought you had to kill to be loved. And ironically, it's the exact place where your strength lives. It's where your authenticity lives. It's where your ability to say, "I'm not doing this anymore," lives. And maybe that version of you doesn't fit into the relationships you've built. Maybe that version of you makes people uncomfortable. Maybe it doesn't get invited to the same spaces, but you don't need to belong in places that only welcome you when you're edited. You need to belong to yourself. Because when you integrate the parts of you that you were taught to hate, a strange thing happens. You become someone you actually respect, not because you're always kind, but because you're whole. Wholeness is the goal, not perfection, not pleasing, not performance. Wholeness. And wholeness means letting your light and your darkness sit at the same table, without shame, without censorship, without begging for approval from people who benefit from your silence. And the moment you do that, the moment you stop splitting yourself in half to be digestible, something unlocks. Your voice changes. Your walk changes. Your presence changes. You stop being afraid of other people's reactions because you're no longer reacting to yourself. You're just being, fully, finally. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt like you had to shrink to be accepted. Let's talk about it. And don't forget to subscribe. This space is for the version of you that refuses to stay hidden. But before that can happen, you have to walk through one last door, the confrontation. The moment you stop running from conflict, not just with others, but with yourself. The moment you look in the mirror and say, "This is who I am, this is what I want, and I will not apologize for existing like I mean it." It's terrifying, it's liberating, and it's the only way to ever be free. But in order to do that, there's one final thing that needs to happen, something that most people avoid until it's too late. In the next part, we'll talk about exactly what happens when you stop performing, when you drop the act, and when you step fully into the version of yourself that no longer fears rejection, because they finally, completely belong to themselves. Get ready, because that's when people start to disappear and your real life begins, and then it happens. The day you stop pretending, not in anger, not in rebellion, but in silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than all the words you've ever used to explain yourself to people who were never listening in the first place. You stop justifying your pain. You stop shrinking your voice to make others feel comfortable. You stop betraying your truth in exchange for temporary peace. You stop negotiating with parts of you that were never negotiable to begin with. And in that moment, everything changes. At first, it's subtle, the way someone doesn't text you back, the way a friend stops inviting you, the way a family member starts calling you difficult, the way someone who once said, "You're the nicest person I know," suddenly accuses you of being too cold, because now you have boundaries. Let them say what they want, because what they're really saying is, "I liked you better when you didn't love yourself," but you're not going back. You've already paid the price for peace, and the cost was your identity. Now you're done. And this version of you, the one who finally honors their inner conflict, the one who listens to the voice beneath the surface, the one who no longer begs to be seen. That version isn't angry. They're clear, they're free. But with that freedom comes something no one tells you, the loneliness of leaving behind the person you used to be, the version of you who smiled through betrayal, the version of you who called it love when it was survival, the version of you who thought that being silent made you safe. Saying goodbye to that version of yourself is painful because they tried their best. They protected you when no one else would. They helped you survive, but now you're not trying to survive anymore. You're trying to live, and to live, you have to step into the fire of confrontation, the fire of rejection, the fire of facing the people who only loved you when you were weak, and realizing they never really loved you. They loved your obedience, so let them leave. Let it burn. Because on the other side of that fire, something is waiting for you. Something more powerful than approval, more healing than validation, more sacred than being liked. Your self-respect, your stillness, your ability to walk into a room and know exactly who you are, even if no one else understands it. That's what Jung meant when he said that freedom comes through integrating the parts of us that we've disowned. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming someone real, someone you trust, someone you don't abandon. And if that means fewer people in your life, so be it. Because the people who stay, they'll be the ones who see the real you, not the edited you, not the agreeable you, not the digestible you. They'll see the whole you, and they'll stay anyway. And that's love. That's connection. That's truth. So from here on out, you don't chase peace at the cost of your power. You don't avoid conflict to avoid discomfort. You don't perform goodness to be accepted. You speak. You choose. You show up, even if your voice shakes. Because you've already been through the worst thing imaginable, abandoning yourself, and now you're never doing that again. So if this message landed somewhere deep inside you, if it woke up a version of you that's been silent for too long, let it stay awake. Don't put it back to sleep. Let this be your turning point, the exact moment when you finally said, enough. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making it through all the way to the end. This wasn't just a video. This was a reclamation of your voice, your fire, and your forgotten strength. And if this spoke to your soul, there's something you need to see next. Right there on the screen is the video that continues everything we started here. It goes even deeper into the truth that no one tells you about self-respect, silence, and walking away from people who only love the broken version of you. Click it now, because the next part of your freedom is waiting.